A year after our divorce, my ex-wife asked me one question that shattered me. I am a 35-year-old man, and my ex-wife's question, 12 words, spoken over a lukewarm cappuccino, split my life into a before and an after. She said, "If the baby is yours, will you pretend he isn't?" I had walked into that cafe on a wet Thursday thinking we were going to talk about paperwork. A year had passed since the divorce. We hadn't screamed in months. We barely texted. The barista knew her order from the old days and called her by name like nothing had changed. I stood there holding a chipped cup, smelling burned milk and rain, and listened to the person I had once promised to grow old with ask me to erase myself. I didn't answer right away. I watched her stir and stir, the spoon tapping porcelain like a clock hand. She looked good in that effortless way people look when they've decided their mess belongs to someone else. There was a softness under her eyes I didn't recognize. Later, I would realize it was sleep deprivation. At that moment, it felt like insulation against shame. "Why would you ask me that?" I said. My voice came out as if I had borrowed it, polite, thin, not mine. She said there were practical reasons. She said she wanted to avoid confusion. She said the baby needed stability. Then she folded her hands as if she had just asked me to water a plant while she was away. I need to tell you the parts that came before, so you can understand why those 12 words landed like a blade. We were together for 8 years. Her name is Claire. We met at a city cleanup, picking up damp paper cups in a park that smelled like cut grass and dog. She made volunteer work look like play. I was a project manager who kept color-coded spreadsheets for fun. She was a teacher who could turn a classroom into a chorus. We got married in a small town hall with hydrangeas from her mother's garden in a borrowed vase. It was simple. It felt like choosing a door together. 3 years into the marriage, we started trying for a child. At first, it was hopeful. Then it became a schedule. Then it became a spreadsheet. Then it became hard to breathe inside our own bedroom. The test started. The acronym started. FSH, SA. I saw my name next to numbers on lab portals like a score I didn't study for. My count was low, not zero, but low enough for doctors to raise eyebrows and slide pamphlets across desks. Claire was patient in public and restless in private. She started talking about donor sperm like she was talking about buying a new sofa, practical, reasonable, inevitable. I wanted to try more with what we had. I threw myself into improvements like a man training for a race: no heat, no alcohol, supplements with names that sounded like boats. I bought looser pants. I set reminders to drink water. I started walking in the mornings and feeling my feet hit the ground like punctuation. I told myself that if I did everything right, the numbers would yield. They moved slightly. Not enough for the pamphlets to disappear. The first time I saw Claire cry about it, she was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, holding a plastic stick like a weather report. She said she felt like our home had shrunk to the size of a lab tube. I told her we were more than data. She told me she was tired of romantic sentences. We stopped kissing in the kitchen. We started pecking between appointments. People underestimate how quietly hope can die. We did one round of IUI with my sample. The clinic was cold and cheerful and had a playlist of songs about beginnings. I gave what men give in those rooms with laminate floors and too many magazines, and then I sat with Claire while she put on her brave face for nurses who had learned not to promise anything. The nurse said she would call in 2 weeks. Claire squeezed my hand as if pressing the future into a shape. No one called. Or maybe someone called and Claire picked up and decided to tell me later. She told me in a flat voice on a Tuesday that it didn't work. She said she wanted to try a donor next. I said I needed time to let my body catch up to my mind. She said time was a luxury biology didn't offer us equally. She started using the word grief for rooms full of boxes we never opened. The months after that were a slow undoing. Her mother began to call more, leaving long messages about accepting help and choosing family over pride. I was defensive and then ashamed for being defensive. Every small argument, the dishwasher, the groceries, the thermostat, turned into a referendum on my masculinity. I slept on the couch twice. The second time, I realized I had begun to prefer the couch because it did not remind me of failure. By spring, we were strangers with a joint lease. Claire suggested a break. I suggested counseling. She went once and folded her arms the whole session. She said she didn't want to be talk therapied into thinking biology was a mindset. Behind that, I could hear something older, her mother's voice, the way it carried through closed doors. In July, we decided to separate. In September, we divorced. I signed the papers in a beige conference room with a fake plant in the corner. It felt like paying a bill for something I had lost months earlier. We split the furniture and the friends and the streaming passwords like civilized people who never wanted to see each other's hurt again. 2 months after the divorce, Claire posted a photo in a field at sunset with a man who had the same smile I had trained myself to make in photos. His name was Julian. He worked in finance. He had a dog with a name that sounded like a watch brand. People commented heart emojis and the phrase, "so happy for you," like confetti. I muted her. I learned to look away. In January, a mutual friend sent me a message I didn't ask for, a blurry sonogram on Claire's story. I stared at it as if it were a map I had forgotten how to read. My first reaction was not anger. It was a hollow sound in my chest like the thump you hear when you knock on a wall and find the empty part. I told myself this was good. She wanted a baby, she was having one. The particular shape of the family didn't have to involve me. I pretended I believed that. I kept my apartment neat. I kept going to work. I ran on cold mornings watching my breath like proof. Some evenings I sat alone and imagined a different version of my life where my body had cooperated, where we stayed kind. Then I put those thoughts away like you put away winter coats at the end of a season, not because the weather has changed much, but because you decide to live as if it has. Now back to the cafe and the sentence that carried a fault line inside it. If the baby is yours, will you pretend he isn't? How could the baby be mine? I finally asked. I said it quietly so the barista wouldn't hear my world shifting. She blinked. She looked at the window. Rain made lines down the glass. She said there had been a timing overlap. She said the IUI we did may not have been a failure after all, that a nurse had once called her back to say something about numbers and early tests and that she had meant to tell me, but then everything was already falling apart, and then she met Julian, and then a second test showed something else, and she didn't want to reopen the wound, and then weeks turned into months, and now there was a baby, and Julian's parents were traditional, and words tangled in her mouth like yarn caught on a nail. The nurse called you back? I asked. When? She said she didn't remember the exact date. She said it was around the day my uncle died and everyone was calling everyone and she missed a lot and maybe I misheard her and maybe she misheard the nurse. She told me the clinic had shrugged when she called a second time and said, "Nature will tell you in time." That last sentence stuck to me because it sounded like something real people never say and PR people always do. "You're asking me to lie," I said. "I'm asking you to protect a child," she said. She sounded noble saying it. I wanted to throw the cup. That night, I lay awake and counted the ways you can love someone and still be cruel. I thought about every appointment I sat through, every form I signed, every time I told myself love was bigger than biology. I thought about a child who could have my eyes or not, who could have a cowlick at the back of the head like my father's, who would grow up calling another man, Dad, while my name turned into a smudge at the edge of a story. The next morning, I wrote to the clinic. I asked for copies of our records. They sent a polite email about privacy and time frames. I kept writing, this time attaching my ID and the dates I remembered. When the PDFs arrived, I opened them like a thief opening a drawer. There were timestamps of samples delivered and procedures done. There was a line that said, "Patient notified to monitor," no clarity on what. There was a second line 2 days later, "Follow-up call, patient will repeat test." We didn't repeat anything. We were busy separating furniture. I stared at the lines until the words blurred. I recognized the nurse's name. She had freckles and wrote her "Y" with a loop. I texted Claire. I told her I had the records. She replied with a thumbs up and then, "Let's not turn this into a witch hunt." I wasn't hunting a witch, I was looking for my life. A week later, a message arrived from an unknown number. "I shouldn't be doing this. Check the clinic's call log for October 12th. Also, watch for a second sample request under your initials." The sender's profile photo was a plant. No name. I wrote back, "Who is this?" There was no reply. I looked up October 12th. That was the day of my uncle's funeral. I had a black tie on. Claire had left early, saying she felt sick. The call log from the clinic showed an outbound call to Claire's number that morning. A note on the file said, "Advised patient to schedule confirmation." Another entry appeared a week later with my initials next to a "sample hold" instruction. I remembered giving a second sample on the IUI day because the first was too small. I didn't remember any hold. I didn't know you could put hope in a fridge. I brought it up with Claire on the phone. She said the nurse had been vague. I asked why, if there was confusion. She hadn't told me then. She said we were already melting down and she chose peace. She used that word, peace, the way people use it as a synonym for silence. "Julian's parents have a family trust," she said, finally saying the practical thing out loud. "There are conditions. You know how old money people can be. It's ugly. I didn't make the rules." "What are the conditions?" I asked, even though I could hear them forming in my head. "That the first grandchild be of their blood," she said. The sentence came out brittle. "If there's doubt, they'll freeze us out. They'll make my life miserable. They'll make his life miserable. The baby doesn't deserve that." "What about the baby deserving the truth?" I asked. I could hear my voice getting harder, like ice forming. "Truth is complicated," she said. "Love is simple." I almost laughed. Love had never been simple in our house. After the call, I went for a run and kept going until my chest burned. I stopped by the river and bent over, hands on knees, and wondered how many men before me had stared at moving water and tried to decide whether to be someone's father or someone's ghost. That afternoon, a photo popped up on my phone in a group chat I had forgotten to leave. It was Claire in a hospital bed, hair matted to her forehead, holding a baby with a hat too big for his head. My body made a sound before my mouth did. He had a small notch on his right ear. My father had the same notch. I have it too. It's nothing mystical, just a fold of cartilage, but seeing it felt like someone tugged a thread through my chest. I didn't reply to the group. I sat alone and whispered congratulations to a room and then deleted the message because I couldn't stand to see my own words beside strangers' hearts and fireworks. Days passed. I didn't sleep much. I thought about hiring a lawyer and then remembered the promise I made to myself after the divorce: no more rooms where people told me the cost of my own heart. I asked a friend who had adopted about the word father and how it carries different weights in different contexts. He said the word is smaller than the work. A week later, Claire sent me a short message asking to meet again. We sat in a quiet park near the hospital. She looked exhausted and holy in a way only new mothers do. She said the baby's name was Eli. She didn't ask if I liked it. She said, "I need to know your answer." She said Julian was fragile and that his parents were watching everything. She told me painting over the truth would keep the baby safe and give him a clean story. She said I could be anything I wanted, an uncle with boundaries, a friend, or nothing at all. Something inside me tilted. I asked to see Eli. She went still, like I had asked to borrow a crown. Then she surprised me. She said okay, for a moment, if I promised not to confuse him. He was a week old. They let me in through a side entrance to avoid scene-making. I washed my hands and sat. The room smelled like lotion and milk. Claire handed me a swaddled weight with careful reluctance. The baby blinked at the ceiling like he was in on a secret none of us had language for yet. I traced the notch on his ear with my eyes, not my finger, and felt something inside me rise and settle. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I counted his breaths. I whispered my name in my head. I don't know if that matters. When I left, the city felt too loud and too precise. Buses pulled to curbs, people shouted orders into phones, a child dropped a grape and began to cry as if the world had ended. I went home and wrote down 3 sentences on a yellow legal pad. I won't lie to a child about himself. I won't burn his mother's life to the ground. I need proof before I make a promise I can't live with. I told Claire I would pay for a private test. She said testing would make things worse. I told her uncertainty is worse than a result. She said she couldn't betray Julian like that. I said she had already betrayed someone, the question was who. She hung up. That night, another message from the plant profile: he deserves his father. Don't let them paper over him. Check the freezer log. The word freezer made my stomach drop. I wrote back, who are you? No reply. At the clinic the next day, I asked to speak to the nurse whose looped Y I recognized. She had transferred departments. The receptionist said she was on leave. Privacy rules were walls I couldn't jump. I left my number on a sticky note I knew would end in a bin. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and watched a young couple walk in holding hands and joking with the kind of desperate lightness people use when they are braver than they feel. I kept a record of everything: dates, times, names, partly to feel like I was doing something other than drowning. In the margins of my notes, I wrote sentences that didn't sound like me. A story without a father is a wound we pretend is a scar. Peace without truth is a staged photograph. A week later, an email arrived from a generic clinic address with a spreadsheet attached. It was labeled, Updated Storage Audit. My name appeared once, in a line with a status changed from hold to discarded. The date of the change was 2 weeks after Claire posted the sonogram. The file had been sent to a distribution list with an address that looked like it was meant for internal staff. I shouldn't have seen it. Someone had added my email. Either the system glitched, or the plant profile had a keyboard. I stared at that line until my eyes watered. There it was, proof not of paternity, but of secrecy. A hold becomes a discard when someone decides there will be no questions asked later. Who asked for that? Who benefited? I wrote to Claire again and said we needed to speak face to face, not in cafes with rain or parks with prams, but in a room with a table and no photographs. She agreed. She suggested a mediator to keep things civil. I said yes because I wanted a witness, even if the witness was a stranger with a notepad. We booked Thursday. On Wednesday night, I lay on my rug and looked at the ceiling fan and thought about the notch on Eli's ear and the way his breaths had made me count mine. I thought about my father's laugh and how it had sounded like a door opening. I thought about being asked to accept a role in my own life as uncle with boundaries, or nothing at all. I thought about the line in the clinic spreadsheet and the words hold and discard, and how they apply to more than samples. I didn't sleep. I wrote another sentence on the pad: tomorrow I will ask for the truth like a person who deserves it. We sat at a long table under fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. The mediator had a calm voice and a small bell on the desk she never rang. Claire arrived with a tote bag and hair that said she had slept in 20-minute increments for a week. Julian came too. I hadn't seen him up close before. He had careful posture and the polite smile of a man who never likes being the least informed person in the room. He offered his hand as if handshakes were shields. I shook it. His palm was cold. The mediator asked us to state our goals in plain sentences. My goal, to learn the truth and to be part of my son's life if he is my son. Claire's goal, to keep stability and privacy. Julian's goal, to protect his family from unnecessary drama. The mediator wrote the words down with a pen that didn't squeak. Then she asked what facts we could agree on. We agreed on the marriage, the IUI, the divorce, the timeline of Claire's relationship with Julian. We did not agree on what the clinic had told Claire or when. I pulled out the printouts of the clinic logs and the freezer audit. My hands shook. I laid them on the table like courtroom exhibits even though I had promised myself I wouldn't turn this into a show. I pointed to the hold and discard. I asked who had requested the change. Claire stared at the papers. Julian leaned forward as if he could read better with his chin closer to the ink. The nurse called and said the sample wasn't needed anymore, Claire said, eyes on the mediator, not on me. I signed something. I don't remember the exact words. Why did she say it wasn't needed? I asked. Because we had decided not to continue with that path. And later, I was pregnant, she said. Her voice wobbled on the last word and steadied again like someone catching a glass before it falls. How did you know you were pregnant? I asked. What told you? A test? A timeline? A feeling? A calendar? Does it matter? Julian said, finally letting irritation darken his vowels. The child is here. He needs parents who aren't litigating a romance that ended last year. This isn't about romance, I said. It's about whether I am his father. Even if you are, Julian said, choosing each word, biology isn't always what counts. I saw the future in that sentence, the shape of the argument they would make in another room without me. Love over blood when blood complicates love. Blood over love when love threatens money. I kept my voice steady. It counts to me, I said. It will count to him when he asks questions and you want to answer them without flinching. The mediator suggested a cheek swab test, private and fast. Claire stared at the bell she could have rung and didn't. Julian shook his head slightly, a signal to a teammate. Claire said, Julian's parents have conditions. I know, I said. A trust, bloodlines. You don't want to make them angry. I don't want my son to be in the middle of a fight he didn't choose, she said, and she looked so tired and true saying it that for a second I hated the part of me that was willing to make a tired woman prove something to me. Then I remembered the cafe sentence. If the baby is yours, will you pretend he isn't? And I found my anger again, quiet and clean. Let me say it plainly, I said. I won't lie for your comfort. I won't tell a child a false story about himself so that rich people will smile at dinner. If he is mine, I will be in his life, kindly or through paperwork, but in his life. If he isn't mine, I will leave you alone to write whatever story you need. But I will not be erased by a sentence. We sat in the quiet. The mediator's pen waited over her pad as if it had something to add. Claire took a breath that sounded like surrender. Fine, she said. A test. We did it there, quick swabs on the inside of cheeks, labels stuck, a courier summoned. Julian paced near the window pretending to read a pamphlet about conflict resolution. Claire watched the door like she expected someone to walk in with absolution. I washed my hands even though I hadn't touched anything. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and thought I looked like my father when he was about to forgive something he shouldn't. Results take time. Time is a cruel room when you're counting breaths. I went to work and answered emails and said words in meetings that sounded normal. At night, I walked loops around my block until my legs ached. I didn't tell my mother because I didn't want to borrow her rage or her saintliness. I didn't tell my friends who would have turned this into a rally. I told the ceiling. It was terrible at keeping secrets, but it didn't give advice. On the third day, the email came. I saw the sender and knew. I opened it because not opening it would have been a theater I didn't have energy for. The numbers were in bold. The words, probability of paternity, 99.98%, sat in the center of the page like a stone in a bowl of water. I double-checked the names to make sure this was my life. It was. I sat very still. Then I stood up and paced and sat down again. I cried without theatrics, the kind of crying your body does like a leak. I thought about the notch on Eli's ear and the way I had counted his breaths. I said out loud, to the room, "Hello, son," and felt ridiculous and faithful at once. I screenshot the result and sent it to Claire and the mediator. I didn't send it to Julian. I typed a sentence and erased it and typed another and erased it. I finally wrote, "I will be at the mediator's office at 10 tomorrow to discuss a plan for Eli. I want to do this kindly. Don't make me bring other people into it." She replied with a single word, "Okay." At the office, Claire looked like someone who had been awake for a month. Her hair was unwashed. Her face was bare. She didn't bring Julian. She said he was with his parents, handling things. I didn't ask what things. I didn't want to know how love and money were being braided in a house with art on the walls. The mediator outlined options like she was narrating a recipe: acknowledgement of paternity, custody schedules, child support, introductions in small doses, transitions that protect the baby's routine. I said yes to most of it. I said no to phrases that turned me into a donor with visiting hours. Claire surprised me again. She said, "I want you in his life," and I believed her not because her words were pure, but because fatigue had stripped her arguments down to their skeleton. "I was scared," she said. "I am scared. I don't know how to do this without burning everything." I said we would try not to light matches near curtains. I said the truth had already done the most dangerous part. We began. I met Eli twice a week for an hour in Claire's living room while she hovered in the kitchen pretending to fold laundry. I held him and memorized the weight of his head on my forearm. I learned the small noises he made before he cried. I learned the way he stared at ceiling corners like they were telling him jokes. The second time, he fell asleep on my chest, and I watched the rise and fall of his back and thought, not eloquently, "I am here." People think the hardest part is the test result or the first visit. It isn't. The hardest part is walking home after you put your son back into someone else's arms. You close a door and your body doesn't know how to return to regular speed. You stand in your quiet apartment and try to be grateful for the absence of screaming. You put your ear to the watch your father left you because you need to hear something tick. Julian reappeared. He was polite and distant. He did not sabotage the visits. He also did not speak to me if he could avoid it. I understood. He had signed up for a story with 2 main characters and found himself in a novel with 3. His parents made their presence known through absence. They did not visit when I was there. They sent notes through Claire about traditions and routines. Once, a message arrived saying they hoped I would be gracious enough to step back during important family holidays to avoid confusion. I replied, "My son is my family," and left it at that. I tried not to fight battles through proxies. I failed once and wrote a longer message that I deleted because I heard my future self regretting it. I told my mother. She put her hand over her mouth and cried the way people cry at baptisms and funerals. She asked when she could meet him. I said not yet. She nodded and didn't argue, which is how I knew she understood the size of this fire. The first time I took Eli to the park alone, sunlight cut through the trees in clean angles and made everything look honest. I pushed the stroller and narrated our route like he could hold a map in his head. A woman on a bench smiled and asked how old he was. I said, "Almost 6 weeks," and felt the word settle in my chest like a good weight. I bought myself a coffee and walked slowly like a person who finally had a reason to be slow. Not every moment was noble. I envied Julian when he kissed the baby's head without asking anyone's permission. I hated him when he took the stroller handle from Claire like it belonged to him by geometry. I reminded myself I didn't want to raise my son inside a cloud of contempt. I failed sometimes in my head and started over in my mouth. A month in, the plant profile messaged again, he knows. I didn't reply. I didn't need that chaos. I blocked the number, not out of anger but because secrets had already cost enough. Whoever had helped me had done their part. I didn't want to live looking over my shoulder for the next leak. And then came the second shattering question, the one I didn't expect, the one that made the first feel like a rehearsal. Claire asked, "Can you forgive me enough not to tell Eli the worst version of me?" We were in her kitchen while Eli slept. Dishes soaked. The window was open and let in the kind of city noise that makes you believe you're not the only person trying. I stared at the sponge in my hand and thought about what children deserve and what truth is for. I thought about my father, who told me once that the hardest part of being a good man was deciding which truths to tell when, so that honesty didn't become a weapon you used to avoid compassion. "I won't lie," I said. "But I won't turn your mistakes into a campfire story either." He doesn't need our scorecards. He needs a map. "What does a map look like?" she asked. "It shows where you are and where you can go," I said. "It doesn't spend a lot of time proving the mountain is tall." We made a plan. We would tell Eli, when he could understand, that he has a father and a stepfather who both showed up, and a mother who was brave enough to correct a hard thing. We would tell him the truth in layers, age-appropriate and kind. We would not use him to hit each other. We would fail sometimes. We would try again. Soon after, Julian's parents cut off the trust. They blamed me in a way that felt like weather, inevitable and unpersuadable. I didn't celebrate. It was money, yes, but also a small death of a dream Claire had stitched together. She went back to work early, not because she wanted to, but because bills do not accept verses about love. I took another project at work that paid more and made my hours worse. I arranged my days around Tuesdays and Fridays like I was building a calendar on two pillars. The city moved on. People posted photos of vacations and brunch and phrases about gratitude. I learned to live in a smaller, truer circle. I bought a plant and kept it alive. I cooked simple meals. I fell asleep on the couch sometimes with baby laundry in my hands. I stopped measuring my worth with numbers on lab reports and started measuring it with minutes of quiet breath on my chest. If you're waiting for the big cinematic reconciliation, I don't have it to give you. Claire and I aren't friends. We are co-parents who speak gently 90% of the time and grit our teeth the other 10. Julian and I are not rivals. We are men who stand on either side of a small boy's stroller and choose, over and over, not to push into each other. Some days we succeed. Some days we are quiet and that has to be enough. The shattering part is that the first question, "Will you pretend he isn't yours?" still echoes in my head at strange hours. I hear it when I clip Eli's tiny nails and when I hand him back at the door and when I catch my reflection holding him and see my father's notch on both our ears. The echo isn't a wound anymore. It's a warning. It reminds me that people will ask you to compress yourself into the shape that makes their dinner easier. It reminds me that love without truth is a house with pretty curtains and rotten beams. If you're reading this because you're standing in a similar hallway, here is the small thing I learned: you can refuse to disappear without setting everything on fire. It isn't clean. It isn't heroic. It is 100 decisions in rooms no one claps in. It is showing up on a Tuesday when you're tired and sitting on the floor and letting a baby chew your thumb while you tell him about birds. It is telling the truth like a person who remembers that the point of truth is not to win, but to build. And on the nights when the house is quiet and I lie awake listening to nothing, I reach for my father's old watch and hold it to my ear. The ticking is soft and mechanical and merciless. It does not slow for grief or speed for joy. It just marks the fact of being here. I close my eyes and picture Eli's ear, the tiny notch, the map will draw together, and I breathe into the space that once was hollow and now, finally, has weight. Some days I still don't know what I'm doing. Some days I look at the calendar and think I am not enough space for this much love and this much correction. On those days, I write one line on a yellow pad and put it on the fridge where only I will read it in the morning: tell him the truth. Hold him steady. Try again. I don't know if that will be enough. I only know it's the opposite of pretending he isn't mine.
Follow me for more stories.